I do believe in God, but being in the world that we are in today and seeing how Christians act, especially in the time of Trump here, it gets hard defending it because you see the actions of these people and you wonder, has anybody ever actually read the Bible? Do they study the Bible too? I mean, there's a difference between reading and studying, in my opinion.
See, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm in agreement with you. As a former Christian, I'm baffled by the Christian support for Trump and a few other people and things. But when it comes to do they read the Bible, do they study the Bible, I was in church far too long to think that there are people who adequately and fairly study the Bible and remain in their religion. To me, the main question is whether or not it's true. That's the first question. And then
Correct.
It's what is it telling us? What, and how should we live our life? There's plenty of good things in the Bible that could guide people to take action. I just don't think that the Bible is required in order for people to do good things or live a better life. And I think that the negative baggage in it kind of wipes out much of the good that's there. But at the end of the day, if it's not true, then it does no good to say, oh, don't kill people because the Bible says so. If it turns out that there is no God, that the Bible isn't telling the truth about the supernatural and the divine or the foundations of morality, then you have to come up with another reason to not kill people. And it turns out it's really easy to do so. And so the Bible isn't necessary. But yeah.
When I read the Bible, I look at the Bible, and when I read it, I don't look at God as a perfect being. And I mean, when I talk to any other Christian in the world, I feel like I'm big time in the minority on that. I believe that God made mistakes with humans in the Old Testament, and I think the covenants prove that. He would curse generations to the third and fourth generation. Well, that would mean, like, if my great-grandpa, who I've never met, if he sinned against God, well, I'm cursed forever. I have no chance.
Well, that goes right back to the beginning. We're all cursed because of what Eve supposedly did.
I know.
So, but the thing here is, the Bible portrays God as perfect. At least in the Psalms, it talks about His way is perfect.
Well, that's anecdotal too. That's David talking about all the problems that he had and the stupid things he did, and God rescued him from that because he's from, the proper lineage, the line,
Sure.
Line. So he basically gets rescued over and over. So he portrays God as perfect. That's anecdotal. That's not proof that God is perfect.
Well, okay. So now you've put two carts in front of the horse, because the first question, okay, you've got the Bible, and the Bible is portraying God as perfect or whatever, and you've decided that God's not perfect. But why on earth would you think there's a God anyway? And if God's not perfect, then you have to say, okay, is God more good than bad? Is he wise at all? Is there any reason for me to pay attention to him, to think that he's authoritative? And all of that is predicated on the notion that a God exists. So for me, I see no reason to think that a God exists. I see no reason to think that the character of God as presented in the Bible or the Quran or a number of other religions is the sort of character that I should really be concerned with as to whether or not, if God says do this or don't do this, my response is, why should I care what God says to do or not do? If God isn't going to demonstrate that he exists and then demonstrate his goodness, then the God that doesn't do that is just as relevant to my life as a God that doesn't exist at all.
Well, he demonstrated himself to the people all over the Old Testament over and over and over. I mean, thousands of times he showed himself to the people.
No,
kept turning.
There are stories. There are stories that claim that God revealed himself.
That's what I mean. That's right. I know that. I'm not here to prove God exists. There's no way I can prove he exists. There's no way I can prove he doesn't exist.
Okay, now hang on. Those two things aren't equal.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If there's no way to prove that God exists, what justification can you possibly have for believing it?
Because I don't believe that because I honestly don't believe that. Because to me, it's easier to believe that there was always a God as opposed to this just came from absolutely nothing. Now, whether I believe that the Bible is historically accurate or not, I mean, this is man who wrote it. I mean, come on, I can't sit there and take seriously what man has written.
So
I just can't. But I can still believe that a God exists.
You can believe whatever you want. I'm asking whether or not that belief is rationally justified. And when I asked why would you believe in something that you say
what's the rationale believing that God doesn't exist?
No, Chris,
that God doesn't exist.
It may not be rational to believe that God doesn't exist. I'm asking, the burden of proof is on the claim. God exists or God doesn't exist. They both have a burden of proof. But if nobody can prove that God exists, and there cannot be a rational reason to believe that God exists, then it is irrational for me to believe that God exists.
But you want proof of either.
No,
impossible.
Tough.
You want proof.
Tough. It doesn't matter what you want. Chris, it doesn't matter what, Chris.
It doesn't work that way.
Chris. It doesn't matter what you want. Sometimes the only answer is, I don't know.
And I'm agreeing to that there's no way to possibly 100% know.
I'm not saying, Chris, I'm not.
Scientists that are out there trying to prove
Chris,
the planet was
created
from nothing.
I'm not talking about 100% anything. Can you see the TV?
No, I'm not watching the TV. I was told I would shut the thing off.
Okay. So in my hand, I have a jar that is full of gumballs. I'm holding it up so that people can see it. Would we agree that, given that there's a quantity of gumballs in here, that the number of gumballs is either even or odd?
Could it be either even or odd? Of course it could be.
It can only be either even or odd, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If somebody writes a story and says the number of gumballs in this jar is even, and they have no evidence for that, do you believe that the number is even?
These are really stupid questions, because once again, you're trying to compare gumballs to God, dude. You can't compare gumballs to God.
So I'm asking a very, Chris,
supposed
Chris,
Baptist preacher,
Chris,
wanted to be one.
Chris,
you're acting kind of ignorant yourself when it comes to this topic. You just keep trying to shift questions in a different direction.
I'm sorry that asking a simple yes or no question based on facts that you've agreed to is too difficult for you. If somebody writes a book,
tell me where.
Goodbye, jackass. Here, let me finish my point. Maybe Chris will hear this someday. If somebody writes a book and says, or hey, somebody says, Phil tells me there's an even number of gumballs in this jar. Does that mean that I believe that it's even? No. I might believe, I might not. We'd have to establish what sort of evidence is required. But if I'm not convinced that the number is even, then I do not believe that the number is even. And if I do not believe the number is even, does that mean that I believe it's odd? No, it doesn't. Am I comparing gumballs to God? Only a sense that these are fucking real, and I can demonstrate it, and I can count them. And when I do that, then I will have evidence to believe whether or not this is even or odd. If your justification for believing in God is because nobody can prove God's not even, you're essentially, or nobody can prove that God doesn't exist, you're essentially saying that you're going to believe it's even because people can't prove it's odd. That's the point. This isn't a dumb example from somebody who wanted to be a preacher and who's just monumentally ignorant. This is straight up Logic 101. This is about establishing a claim and a burden of proof, and then determining what standards of reasonableness are required to reach a conclusion. It's not my fault that you refuse to do that with respect to God. And what's sad is, as soon as your brain realized that you are going to have to admit that you don't do that with respect to God, and you were going to have to acknowledge this conflict, all of a sudden the gumball example became this is just stupid, you're comparing gumballs to God. That's a nice defense mechanism, but if that's what it takes to make you think that you're being rational when you're not, you have demonstrated that you are engaged in self-delusion, that you don't know or care about what is reasonable to believe by dismissing the simplest example of claims, burden of proof, and evidence. by suggesting that, oh, well, you're comparing gumballs to God and blah, 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 and that's not fair, and you might make me admit that I don't actually have a good reason. No, you already admitted you didn't have a good reason, because when I asked you, you said, I just can't believe that there wasn't a God always here. I just can't believe that stuff came about without a God.
That it's easier.
Yeah, it's easier to believe. Those are all arguments from ignorance and convenience. They are all fallacious. They get you nowhere with regard to whether or not your belief is justified. Or they don't get you anywhere closer to being justified. If anything, every one of your answers demonstrates that your conclusion is wholly unjustified. It is rooted in fallacies, and I'm sorry that it makes you uncomfortable to be faced with logic.